Welcome everyone. So this is a lesson on building logical paragraphs, and while there may be many ways to build a useful, clear, and effective paragraph, this is the first installment of this, and it's very basic and straightforward. It's easy to remember, and it's easy to build off of. So the first assignment that we're working on that will actually require you to build a paragraph and to write with paragraphs is assignment 7055. It is our second assignment in the course, and so this is its page in the wiki. Feel free to check out my other videos about the wiki and this assignment. Okay, so after you read all the information about the assignment in general, you can come down here and see these other useful links. And the one I want to pay special attention to for this video is the analysis of opening, middle, and closing. So if you click on that, this page will open up. And basically this is referring to the opening, body, and closing of a document. Okay. And so one way to think about how paragraphs work with one another is to remember that anytime you change a topic, you should change paragraphs. It's a nice visual way of letting a reader know that we're about to change our topics. It makes it a lot easier to consume a lot of information. We want to make it easier for our reader. If you just see an entire page of just straight text, it can be overwhelming and people don't want to read that. So paragraphs help break things up. It allows you to take a mental breath, and it is a clear indicator that there is a new topic. So I will be looking to see how you use paragraphs, and if you have a change of topics and no paragraph breaks, I will take notice of that. So one way that paragraphs build off of each other is that the first paragraph or first section should prepare the reader to better understand what's coming next, and the next, and the next. Basically, you can state one idea and expand on that, and then the next paragraph should take us to something new that builds off of the last paragraph. So these paragraphs shouldn't be, islands unto themselves in which they have nothing to do with each other. They should build off of the knowledge that came before. Okay, so an opening, I find this page very helpful, should capture the interest of the reader, motivate the reader to continue reading, and establish context. So in the context of assignment 7055, when you write the executive summary, for example, of lesson 3, if I wanted to establish a context, I would want to, in the intro or in the opening, I would want to explain the overall topic of lesson 3 and what it has to do with writing, so that it sets my reader up to go deeper into the middle of my executive summary. And this is where your key points will be. And I will be expanding on the paragraph structure of paragraphs that go in the middle or the body in a minute. Once you've done your body paragraphs or your middle, then you go on to your closing. And this is where, and the closing can do several things depending on the appropriateness of the genre. It can resolve conflicts established in the opening and or middle of the text. So for example, in your reflective memo, the second task in assignment 7055, your job in the body, or the middle, is to talk about aggregating and how that relates to the executive summary you created. Another paragraph in the body is to talk about the visual arrangement of memos and being able to use the example memo that you created in your first document of this assignment. Now, at first glance, those two paragraphs don't seem to have anything to do with each other. So in the closing, I would be able to talk about or conclude on what those two have to do with each other. And that would be me resolving conflicts established in the middle of my text. Talking about the challenge of aggregating and then the visual arrangement seems to be a conflict of why they are in the same document, and in the conclusion I can wrap that up for my reader. Okay, so that's the overall idea. of the beginning, middle, and closing, and in later videos I will expand on how these parts interact with each other in a logical way. But for right now, for this video, I want to focus on the middle, and that is the body paragraphs. And so we want to make sure that we develop our body paragraphs in a very logical, clear, straightforward way, because if our readers cannot follow the logic of our paragraphs, then they won't get what we're trying to say. Okay, so this is a template of a memorandum for this assignment. So you can see by the subject line that this is for 7055, the reflective memo on aggregating and visual design. Okay, so if I was to outline my body paragraphs, I know I want to have one on aggregating and one on visual design. But other than that, how do you decide what to start your paragraph with? What goes in the middle of your paragraph? What concludes your paragraph? And so what I like to use is something I like to call the peck order. And so this is a form of logos that I like to teach in my business writing classes. So this is the rhetorical triangle, and is made up of ethos, pathos, and logos. And I will be expanding on ethos and pathos in other videos later on. But we're going to focus on logos. And logos is the logical progression of our text. A lot of people like to think of logos as, oh, I just need to use facts and figures for my evidence, but that's really only a third of what makes up logos. Logos is making sure that you have individual points or premises, arguments, that are then supported by sufficient evidence, and all of that leads to a logical conclusion. So, for example, I might say, as a premise, the landscape in Illinois is very boring. That is a premise of belief. I believe it, but my reader may not. And as a result, I will need to support that with evidence sufficient enough to convince you, my listener, that that is true. And so I might support this by saying boring is defined by having little variety, and then citing how much percentage of the landscape is in Illinois is corn. And so if I'm able to provide enough evidence or sufficient evidence to convince you, my reader, of this premise that the landscape in Illinois is boring, then you should then accept my conclusion, which is, I might say, therefore, we should take more trips outside of Illinois. So you can think of the structure of a paragraph a lot like this. So you see the peck order here: premise, evidence, conclusion. So returning to my Word document, your first sentence is your premise. And you can think of this as an I think statement. It is something that you believe, but you want to convince your reader of it. It puts your argument up front, and so your reader understands what you are trying to prove when they move on to reading your evidence. Okay? And they will be able to judge whether that evidence is sufficient or not to prove your premise. And if it is, you want to draw your reader to a conclusion. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with conclusions. I think people think of them as, I just need to repeat my point. But what you're really doing with a conclusion is tying the idea of this paragraph or premise that you've just proven of this paragraph to the overall purpose of your document. And that overall purpose might be something you write in the intro as a thesis, or it might be something you write in the closing as a final thought or an ask that you want your reader to accomplish for you. So in this assignment, I might interpret the purpose of figuring out, of reflecting on the purpose of aggregating and visual design. The purpose is to understand why a memo looks the way it does and why the content should be in the order that I put it in. Okay? So if this body paragraph is about aggregating, for example, I might say, so just as a reminder, what we're supposed to be saying in this paragraph. Okay, so I'm supposed to talk about how aggregating is important for my executive summary of Lesson 3. So I might make a claim of saying, I